Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar of 2022, Top Trends in Reimagining the Healthcare Digital Experience. While we wait for some other attendees to finish joining, I'm going to go over our usual housekeeping items. Today's webinar is presented by Geonetric. We are a digital experience agency with deep technical and creative expertise, trusted by the top health systems in hospitals in the industry. We also provide digital experience strategy, user experience consulting, website redesigns, and creative digital services optimized for the unique needs of the healthcare industry. We also create compelling digital experiences on Sitecore, Drupal, and other digital experience platforms, as well as on our own VitalSite content management system. Geonetric clients are continuously honored for delivering best-in-class digital experiences. Just last November, University Health in San Antonio, Texas, took home platinum at the eHealthcare Leadership Awards for Best Overall Patient Experience, so shouts out to them. Congrats, everybody. If today's your first webinar with us, welcome. Just some best practices here. Our webinar today will run approximately 1 hour. If you're listening on a speakerphone, we do recommend you mute your line to prevent any audio quality issues. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation, so please enter those in the questions box within the GoToWebinar platform. We depend on your feedback to make these webinars the best they can be, so please take a moment to complete the survey that pops up at the end of the webinar. And finally, a recording of this presentation will be posted on geonetric.com in the ideas section. And we will also email out a copy of the slides from today and also a recording to all of the attendees. Today we have two presenters for you. We have Ben Dillon, Chief Strategy Officer, and David Sturtz, Vice President of Experience Strategy. I am going to go ahead and let those two kind of intro themselves a little bit later on, but right before we get started, I wanted to let you know about a companion piece that we're offering with today's webinar. We have an ebook that's ready to go called Reimagining the Healthcare Digital Experience. So if you're interested in today's topic, reading more about it, or just having something kind of physical to print out if you like, you can go to geonetric.com/reimagine and get signed up to download that. So without further ado, I will let Ben and David take it away.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us here in January. As is our custom, we are going to talk about trends in the healthcare digital marketing universe. Specifically today, I think we're going to focus a little bit more on reimagining the digital experience, since that seems to be where a lot of that focus is. Associating faces and voices. I'm Ben. The voice that doesn't sound like me is David. We're excited to be here with you. As we have usually done, we want to start out by just sort of checking our score for the year. We did this last year. We had some predictions. Wanted to see how we did against those predictions. To start out with, we thought that maybe we would have a return to normalcy by the fall of 2021. I think it's fair to say right now that that was a miss. We've had some what feels like returns to normalcy, but they continue in Groundhog Day fashion to be returned, followed by returns to a lot of overwhelmed hospitals and surges in the disease. We also predicted that there were going to be tremendous logistical challenges for health systems in 2021. And a lot of that was going to be focused around convincing people that to get vaccinated, that vaccines were safe, that they were effective. And a lot of that effort was going to be focused not just at consumers, but also at staff within these organizations. And I think it's fair to say that that has been a real challenge, and one that I think just about every community in the U.S. We're not doing as well as we'd all hoped to be doing, about a year into having vaccines available to us. The other thing that we predicted last year was that staffing was going to be a real challenge that we were going to be facing real burnout problems, and that a lot of time and energy was going to have to be focused on how to engage with our employee base, with our coworkers, and provide them support that allows them to continue to come in and do the job that they need to do. And I think that's continued to play out. We've had some big departure issues. I think every health system that we work with has some level of staffing challenges going on. A lot of critical services that are really important during these surges have really been particularly stretched thin, particularly hit hard. And it wouldn't surprise me if we continue to see burnout, people leaving the industry, people reevaluating what they're doing professionally, and so forth here over the course of at least the next year. And then the final prediction that we had was that digital transformation was going to be accelerating despite what we saw as this challenging environment throughout 2021. And I'm going to give us a mixed score on this one. We certainly saw coming into 2021 from our survey in 2020 of the industry that while there were a lot of organizations pumping the brakes because of getting overwhelmed because of financial challenges, other things related to the pandemic, that there were also a lot of organizations that were taking this cue to really hit the gas in terms of trying to reinvent themselves, reinvent the way they engage with consumers, using technology as sort of a catalyst for those changes. We saw some of that same stuff happening in 2021. There's a lot of efforts underway, and frankly, some efforts have made some really big steps, or some organizations, I should say, have made some really big steps in terms of advancing the digital transformation agenda within the organizations. There's been a huge amount of discussion. I think it's kind of on the radar of pretty much every healthcare organization out there today. But at the same time, I think that those challenges of the past year, the start and stopping of services, the surges, all those sorts of things, have forced a lot of organizations to make less progress on a lot of these initiatives than they'd hoped or they'd expected to make during the course of 2021. So we've got a lot of interest, we've got a lot of momentum. We still have a long way to go in terms of executing on a lot of the visions that we hear organizations in healthcare talking about on this front.
And that brings us to kind of our big trend in 2022 is the effects of that continued acceleration. So while organizations continue to push forward, what we're hearing is really a kind of crisis in the healthcare consumer experience. And we've kind of categorized that in three different areas that we'll dig into deeper today. The first of those being access and convenience, and then the ongoing patient experience, and the idea of data-driven continuous improvement. And these three themes just echo throughout what we're seeing healthcare organizations really grappling with coming out of some of these efforts in the last few years. To put that into a little bit different model and kind of align it with that healthcare journey, again, really starts from healthcare consumers getting care, getting into the system, and then engaging with a continuous health and wellness process. So continuing to engage them throughout that overall life cycle, that lifetime of care, and then doing all of that within a context of unified data. And these are three of the themes that we really see pushing forward. Where that intersects with consumer experience and the expectations that consumers have at this point is that those have shifted as well. And in the last couple of years, we've all really experienced new kinds of behaviors we've taken on, online shopping and contactless pickup and doing workouts with Peloton or whatever the equivalent is for you, doing home delivery, just a lot of changes in the way that we're interacting with brands and acting as a consumer, as well as things like remote work and being much more familiar with teleconferencing technology, the flexibility that all of those things have been able to provide for us. So with those shifts in consumer behavior, and there come shifts in expectations as well. As we look outside of the healthcare industry, and that's typically where we look for where is that bar at as far as the best possible digital experience, what industries are leading overall, because from a consumer's point of view, that's the expectation, is the best experience I have in whatever industry sets that bar. So this is some data from McKinsey & Company. They did a survey, a global digital sentiment survey, looking at how consumers perceived different industries and brands in those industries across 5 different aspects of the digital experience. So digital adoption, digital spending, frequency of usage, experience satisfaction, and user trust. And so the chart here is looking at the size of the opportunity for each industry to improve on the experiences that they have today. So as you go down in the scale, you're further and further away from that bar that is being raised. So you can see healthcare wasn't the worst across the board, but I pulled in where healthcare fell in each of those areas. Pretty close on digital adoption, but pretty far away on user trust. And which industries are really leading the pack in each of those areas. And you can see it's really, with the exception of entertainment holding 2 of those, they've got that adoption. Pretty much everybody has some streaming service they go to, and the frequency of usage, we're using those streaming services a lot. There's a lot of different industries in there. So digital spending in the grocery industry, the satisfaction in travel, of course, it's always satisfying to book a fun trip and have that to look forward to. But the user trust in the banking side as well. And that's, thinking again in terms of healthcare, that's been a big challenge in the last year or two as more cybersecurity threats have popped up, and it's just been an ongoing battle. So the question in my head is, what if healthcare really raised the bar to the top there? What is the risk of not doing that? Throughout this cycle, there's opportunity for consumers to be drawn away from that engagement with the health system. So if you look at this model on the left, is really the services offered by the health system right out of the gate. The convenient access to the health system creates some friction there. So if there's a more convenient experience to get a telehealth visit or to be seen today, those kinds of things can draw the consumer right away away from the health system. Thinking about that ongoing relationship, I think what we've seen is a continual just erosion of those touch points as new entrants in the market start to pick up different pieces of the puzzle that have been traditionally done by the health system. So if you're looking at pharmacies that are doing more testing and immunizations and having those more frequent touch points, that starts to create a gravity pulling consumers away from that health system. And at the end of the day, that all results in lost lifetime value. And we're really shifting that thinking from that transactional mode of care or that episodic interaction to what is the lifetime value of engaging with that consumer.
Now we looked at some of the capabilities that we're talking about here in our most recent survey of the industry. So we do an annual-ish survey. We don't do it every year, but we do it many years, asking a bunch of questions about how health systems are getting digital done within their organizations. And this year we did a little bit of a deep dive on some of these capabilities that we saw particularly tied to initiatives like Digital Front Door and digital experience. And we asked in that context what the importance of those different areas was, as well as what the current capabilities that health systems had implemented there. And what we're really looking at here is the gap between those two. Where are the places where we have the most ground to make up as an industry? And again, it mirrors those themes that we've been talking about throughout. How do we get consumers access to care, right? Connecting consumers with the right care options for their particular situation. How do we connect them to those? Actually, greater abilities to make appointments online without having to pick up a phone, particularly in this case for patients that might not have a long existing relationship with the health system, might not have patient portal accounts and things like that in place today. And other things like urgent care queuing, kind of the call ahead and put me on the list, I'm heading over to the urgent care, those kinds of things. Big ground to make up in all of those spaces. As David mentioned, this virtuous cycle of ongoing health and wellness that we'd really like to get consumers and patients into to help them be well. A lot of things that relate to that as well. How do we connect people with support resources? How do we help them find the answers that they need? And honestly, how do we build a more personalized digital experience for them based on where they're at, what they're engaging with, and things of that nature? And then finally, that unified data experience, right? How do we get an overall unified picture of consumers and patients, that one view of the consumer, and then also the one way for them to authenticate so that we can actually utilize that in a way that's HIPAA safe throughout this environment as well.
So let's just walk through some of the aspects of a consumer digital experience that are really compelling and are common across many of the leading digital experiences today. We've got four main principles to think about. The first is that they provide instant access to solutions. They make complex offline operations invisible. They tend to get better the more that we use them and engage with them. And as a result, they create a long-term sticky kind of brand relationship between the consumer and the brand. So with those principles in mind, I want to walk through an example here with one of my personal favorite brands that I engage with. Starbucks is something we can all kind of wrap our heads around. In terms of instant access to solutions, as I go in and engage with them digitally through their app, it's very easy for me to go back to my favorites, order those favorite drinks, and have that ready waiting for me at the Starbucks down the block. To accomplish that, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and I'm sure many of you have experienced sort of the fails in the last few months as they had different supply chain disruptions. But that really reveals the complexity that's going on behind the scenes to know what is in stock, which flavor syrup is in stock at the Starbucks, particularly down the street from you, and whether that's going to be available today or not. Along the way, they have some different methods baked into the system to make it better for you as you continue to engage. They use kind of the point system, like a lot of hotels and airlines. They've got their stars as you make purchases. But they're also doing some interesting things to create that sticky relationship and change the behavior of the consumers that are engaging with the app. So as you go through there, they'll give you sort of challenges to go buy additional items or try new things or order something that you haven't ordered in a while. And as you explore, that's changing your behavior. They're trying to get a bigger foothold from just that coffee purchase into pastries and lunch and sandwiches and the whole bit. So something that really benefits them as a brand. So that's kind of the out of industry example. To walk through a quick one, more inside of the healthcare space, taking a look at Walgreens app, again, making those instant solutions available. They have a button in the app just to find care, and they've got that trademarked as well so that it looks really easy to jump in there and just start getting solutions to whatever my concern is today. Along with that, they've also made the complex offline processes just go away. So instead of a pumpkin spice latte being available or not, they're telling you exactly which flavor of COVID-19 vaccination they have available at the nearest Walgreens and when you can sign up to get that. They have some interesting features baked in to encourage reuse and to take a certain mind share with the app. So they have some weather forecasting stuff as well as sort of health forecasting pieces baked in. So what is the spread of COVID-19 near you? What does the flu situation look like where you're at? What does pollen and allergies look like? So kind of trying to take a health focus on that daily use and get that engagement built up. And then they also have some different ways to engage and change behaviors, learning more about you in terms of the conditions you may be living with and how you might get personalized care for those. And so really interesting different combinations there. Some of those are directly provided by Walgreens. Some of those are more of a marketplace of third-party services, but tying that together in a really consumer-focused way. So as we dig into access and convenience and really thinking a little bit more deeply about this space, we're kind of looking back at where things have come from. And over the years, we've really seen the pathways to accessing and receiving care just multiplying like crazy. So maybe 10 years ago, you went online and you could find a doctor, you could find a location, you could call for an appointment. Maybe you could request an appointment, but that was about it. And things have just rapidly moved forward. And certainly we've all experienced in the last couple of years turning new systems online and bringing up new capabilities. And now there's all of these different options spread throughout our digital experiences. And You multiply these times the different departments and locations and practices that may be using different systems and processes to create these engagements, and you've got a lot of complexity for the user. So while access is improved, we've really tackled that first box there. There's still a lot of burden on the consumer. We haven't really made the offline operations, who are you actually seeing? What kind of appointment is this? What's the back end system? And that can't be exactly the same as the other system. Or you're seeing this doctor and they want their intake to happen this way. We haven't made all of that just go away yet. And so that's, as we're looking forward, the trend that I think we're seeing here is a movement towards really consolidating that experience back down to something that is just closer to that request to get care and becomes much more of a guided experience. As the consumer, what I have in my head is I have a problem, I need to get some healthcare. And where I need to do that, there's a lot of complexity in making that decision. We're working through processes right now to help consumers navigate that and understand what those options are, how to balance things like convenience and need for deeper specialty care, and to really guide them in those experiences. I think that's an opportunity within healthcare as you think about those sticky brand experiences. The more that we can educate consumers along the way, and while taking that burden off of them, the better.
I think one illustration of a place where the options available and the range of things has continually changed over the course of the pandemic is within telehealth. And certainly this has been one of the poster children for how healthcare has changed, but the rules have really moved and shifted throughout this, and it's certainly not the only example of that. When we look at some of these antibody regimens, the rules on who can and can't get those vary from system to system, week to week. Telehealth, very similar kind of thing, a lot of change going on. In our survey last year, we took kind of the temperature of how much this telehealth realm had changed. And I think it's a great illustration of, given the right motivations and given the willingness of the insurance companies to pay for this, we can move very quickly as an industry. Whereas I think a lot of us thought that maybe, from a cultural perspective, from a lot of other perspectives, we were just whales that could only swim straight, and turning was very hard. I think we've proven that's not true. At the beginning of the pandemic, at least from the group that we surveyed, nearly 60% really had nothing in terms of virtual care capabilities. And then by the time we were taking this data in the middle of last year, just about everyone, 99% of respondents had virtual care at some level, although depending where they started, it really dictated a lot of how effective they were, how high the degree of provider adoption they were able to gain, some of those kinds of things. So organizations with a head start were able to get further more easily, but everyone was able to move in a very significant way over the course of the pandemic. However, the telehealth picture in 2021 versus the telehealth picture in 2020 was pretty significantly different. We saw this explosion of things in 2020, and while there was certainly a lot of telehealth going on in 2021, certainly compared to any other year other than 2020, we saw about a 40% drop in the number of telehealth encounters in 2021 versus 2020, right? Many of our organizations reopened. We figured out how to keep a lot of services open even during surges. Just the landscape changed. And as you can see, and we're not going to get into this in any detail, but I thought it was really interesting just how much this stepping back varied from state to state. Some areas we saw maybe a 25 or 30% step back in the number of telehealth appointments. Some saw 60% step back in the number of appointments. So a lot of variability in how these kinds of things played out. So there's been kind of this dance going on now. When we put this together initially, there was a lot of duct tape and baling wire holding it together. It was very common for different groups within the organization to have contracted with different telehealth providers for these services. So many health systems were trying to manage a bunch of different platforms for this stuff. Oftentimes the processes were not put in place before the actions happened. So there was a lot of learning going on, but as a result, the actual experience from service to service within the organization could be very different. So now we're seeing really a push for organizations to operationalize what they're doing from a telehealth perspective. what's appropriate clinically to do through telehealth, where is this going to be reimbursed? And I think the good news here is CMS has at least extended coverage of telehealth services through all of 2022. It seems likely that a lot of the private insurers are going to follow suit if they haven't already. We're seeing many states implementing some kind of telehealth payment parity legislation or advancing legislation around that, sort of indicating that if you're going to receive services through telehealth, they need to be reimbursed in the same way as that same service not through telehealth. So there's a lot of progress being made in sort of making this a solution for the long term versus this kind of emergency use kind of application that I think we had through 2020, 2021. A lot of organizations are reducing the number of tool sets they're working with, they're dealing with the integrations, all those kinds of things are going on now. Now, most of us on this call are probably not that deeply involved in a lot of those, legislative and operational priorities, but what this comes down to for us is we need to figure out how telehealth fits into the overall digital experience that we're putting together. How do we connect consumers, and then this is that access question we've been talking to, how do we connect consumers to telehealth as one of their options when it's appropriate out there? And so, I think the place for most organizations to begin is to really understand how consumers are getting to this stuff today. Really go through a UX assessment, understand how people are interacting with the site, figure out how they're accessing care through the site now. What are they going through? What are they experiencing? What does that feel like to people who are looking for care? And I think coming out of the other end of that, I think one of the things we're likely to see is a growing number of navigator tools, right? Questions or tools that maybe walk people through that decision tree in a natural way that helps the system understand what your situation is now, why you're looking for care now, how urgent is this, do you have a PCP, is this specialty or primary care, all those kinds of things. And then giving you, hey, here's some of the options that seem appropriate. Now let's take you down the digital pathway for actually making that appointment or getting to that urgent care, whatever that may be as that next step. And so, actually putting the tools together that connect consumers to the actual care, and then allowing them to actually engage with that care at some level, whether it's telehealth, whether it's appointmenting, whether it's, call ahead seating kind of, restaurant style, whatever is appropriate for that particular service, more tools to help consumers navigate that mess. Because as David showed in this slide earlier, the number of options here has really exploded, and we can't expect consumers most of whom don't actually engage with the health system that often to be really sophisticated about how they're going to navigate those and figuring out which things are appropriate for their current scenario. Now, as we look at sort of the goal of all this, the ongoing patient experience, we want to think through kind of what the role this plays. And I think in addition to the shift in consumer expectations, we've had a shift in consumer loyalty to healthcare. And there was some discussion of this. I remember, seeing some things from advisory board and some other places questioning if patient loyalty was really where we thought it was as an industry before all this happened. But we've, over the course of the pandemic, really seen the loyalty numbers kind of fall apart in a lot of ways. I've seen a number of different reports on this. This is my favorite set of data. This comes from Klein and Partners, and Rob Klein runs this big omnibus survey of consumers every year. And during 2020, he broke it into 4 waves to kind of watch how consumer behaviors and opinions were shifting over the course of that year. And so in May 2020, again, relatively early in the pandemic, 40%, upwards of 40% of the consumers that he surveyed said, there's really no reason I can envision where I would switch providers for care. And by December of that year, right, within less than a year, that number dropped to 18%. So, what's going on here that consumers are feeling like, there we go. Sorry about that. Computer's acting a little bit weird here. All right. So what's going on here? What is driving this change in the loyalty situation? And I think at the outset we need to own as an industry a bit of the challenge here. we've made care more and more transactional. Most of the healthcare systems out there have done things to make that shift. You know, when I was a kid, when you were sick, you called your PCP, you called your doctor, you went in, you saw your doctor. That was where the relationship lived. Increasingly, and you know, I think this is particularly true in the last 10 years or so, when you have an issue that requires you to be seen for something today, very often you're going to an urgent care, which may or may not be associated with the same organization as your primary care physician. Or if you can get into their office at all, you're often not actually seeing your doctor. You're seeing a PA, you're seeing someone else. Um, and so, you know, when we make the people basically, you know, commoditized, when you know, allow us to kind of tell us that it's okay to swap different care providers, our relationship to that one care provider is going to be different. And we haven't then replaced that loyalty with the individual provider to some kind of a loyalty with the organization. We haven't done anything that makes that's really shifted that in that way. Now, at the same time, and this is the thing that we were all talking about in 2019, there was this huge growth in the number of competing options for care available to consumers, right? And that was every health system either acquiring or growing to be present in more markets out there. It was a lot of third parties that were sort of somewhat related to the healthcare industry, opening more services, right? You know, pharmacies opening urgent cares, you know, things of that nature, startups, you know, with other care options that might be available. Walmart opening clinics and having plans to put that into thousands of locations across the country. So there's just more options that are often just more convenient for your patients to go receive care that they might need in more of an urgent fashion. And then the pandemic hits, right? And so in that environment, we then have a situation where there's lots of cancellations that have to happen, rescheduling that I think, you know, it's sort of generous to call it suboptimal. And so these higher convenience alternatives were out there. Consumers went to another health system because they might have that service available to them more quickly. They're just people experiencing a lot of different care venues all of a sudden and finding out that they're, in a lot of cases, they feel pretty good. You know, the experience is pretty good. It feels like they're getting good enough care and all those things, if not better care than they may feel. And so suddenly consumers concerns about maybe going and seeing some other venues sort of floated away. They were, you know, sort of forced to experience them. Now it's been a bit normalized. And so the result of that is, as this patient loyalty has diminished, instead of just competing to get that patient up front, and then assuming that we largely keep most of their care over time, we're increasingly needing to compete for every patient encounter, even with patients we have a relationship with. Which brings up this question, like, how do you compete within healthcare, right? Like, you know, you can't really compete on price in a lot of cases. You know, it's handled in negotiations with insurance companies. Often, it's difficult for us to even figure out what consumers out of pocket costs are going to look like. It's really tough to differentiate offerings. You know, nicer offices, sure, like we all try to put our stuff in the most convenient place, but that's a battle you can only win for some people and not for others. And you know, I think increasingly what we're finding is the basis upon which we're going to compete across the board is going to be in that consumer experience. And so when we look at our survey results again from 2021, this has been where a lot of the focus has started to shift in terms of digital goals and the importance of digital measurement items, right? So in 2020, patient acquisition was far and away the top item from a goal perspective, right? Things that shut down, they were reopening. Getting schedules filled was like 110% the goal that everyone was focused on. As we get into 2021, that recognition that, you know, we're going to have to compete on experience in a lot of ways. The experience that people are going to get first is a digital one. The consumer experience, consumer engagement jumped way up and became the top items for the importance of what we're trying to accomplish through a number of these digital initiatives.
So thinking about where the challenge comes in when we're thinking about that long-term patient engagement and relationship, similar to what we saw with the pathways to care, there's just been an explosion in different sort of systems and parts of the organization that are supporting that engagement and supporting that experience and creating that experience. The challenge is that they're very disconnected a lot of times and not overlapping. They're owned by different groups inside the organization. They don't always make, a whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. And so as we go back to those principles around what makes a great digital experience, while we've got a lot of options on the table here and a lot of touch points with our healthcare consumers, we're not at the point yet where these things are getting better the more that they get used, or that they're really truly creating that sticky brand relationship. So to address that, what we really see the trend towards is to attack that challenge by bringing these systems closer together, creating that shared data in there, and looking at this as a holistic consumer experience. So all of these things really need to be accounted for. Not everything can be 100% controlled, and it's not a black and white kind of thing where one day it's not solved and the next day it is. It's just an ongoing process of moving these pieces closer together, connecting that experience, and really shifting towards that idea of creating something that is a cohesive and greater experience for the consumer than where we're at today. So the question then is where to begin on that. The first step here is really getting that consumer-centric mindset, understanding the customers, and building that, not only the data behind that, but also that mindset throughout the organization. Some great ways to do that are through persona development. That's something we help a lot of clients with, to help create that shared understanding of who the audience is, who we're addressing when we're working on different features and experiences. To do those patient journey maps and to really look at what is that experience from the patient or from the healthcare consumer's perspective, and then using all of that information to review the user experience as it stands today. So looking end to end from when people are first thinking about care or first thinking about the situation in front of them, what is that? What are the steps along the way? And how do we start to tweak some of those steps and make small changes that can improve that overall journey? So that brings us to our third area of focus, data-driven continuous improvement. And we'll start out here thinking a little bit about when is it time to reassess your digital experience strategy? And this question comes up a lot. How do we know we need to make a change? What are the signs that something has shifted? And so I always like to bring it back to this model of what goes into a user experience. It's really this intersection of the business context, the needs of your audience, of healthcare consumers in this case, and the content of that digital experience itself. What is going into those interactions, and we're aiming right for the middle of that. We want to focus the bulk of our efforts right into that overlap where everything really lines up. But what happens over time, and certainly in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of changes. So changing business models, the audience has changed, as we've been talking about, the expectations of the consumers have changed. And as those pieces of the puzzle move, all of a sudden, where we were right on track before, that experience doesn't line up anymore. And so we need to come in and rethink that experience and realign where we're at. So if you're thinking about your own organization, thinking about your own market, and you see a lot of those changes going on, you've acquired new facilities and moved into new geographic territories, you've got audiences that are doing things in new and different ways, you've maybe got some competition that is changing mindsets around how people are interacting. All of those kinds of things really can prompt a reevaluation of that overall strategy. Alongside of that, we've got the technology that goes with that as well. And while we really want to stay consumer-centric in the experience that we're designing, that technology has to support that as well. And we've got new capabilities. So the risk here is that we create that really disparate set of things on those bubbles of pieces that aren't talking to each other. But ideally, all of these parts of the system come together, and there's a number of different layers handling that user experience and connecting it together in ways that work across multiple different channels. And so we're seeing a lot of trend towards organizations moving forward with things like customer data and CRM solutions that can help tie the pieces together and create that overall lifetime view of the healthcare consumer, and working through even kind of those things on the back end that are less appealing sometimes, that working out the governance side of things or the content operations in order to make time and put the effort in front of those things that are a little bit more consumer centered. Along the way, we're seeing a shift as well in how organizations are thinking about that digital experience, where in the past it's really been a project-oriented mindset. The shift has been, and not just in the healthcare industry, but across the board, towards more of a product mindset. So just to highlight the differences in thinking there, where in a project, you tend to be really internally focused. Who are the stakeholders? What are we gaining internally? What's the staffing model look like? The shift with a product mindset is towards much more of a customer focus. We want to be really consumer centric in how we're thinking about the outcome of the project. Again, shifting from following a plan, looking at milestones and timelines, to delivering value. It doesn't really matter if we've hit all of our milestones if no value is delivered at the end. So we want to make sure that we're finding those small slices of value and delivering along the way. Rather than that big bang, build it once kind of mentality, shifting towards smaller slices, small frequent batches that can give us learning and point the way to the next improvements that we need to make. And then along the way that organizations are working is shifting from more of the functional silo kind of approach to really building more persistent cross-functional teams. So since this is much more of a learning process and a value-oriented process, it really requires a lot of different viewpoints and perspectives to come together, and that team needs to be learning together along the way as well.
So if we think about how that looks within one of these places where the digital strategy plays out, your website, we've traditionally been in a mode where every 3, 4, 5, 6 years, we're taking the things that we put together, we're kind of blowing it all up and we're reassembling it, right? Which is that older way of thinking about things. Where imagine some other system that you had out there, and every couple of years you walked in and it was a completely new system that had been put in place there. And so that continues to be the mode, I think, for many, many health systems today. This is again data from our 2021 survey. We look every time we do the survey at what the redesign life cycle looks like for health systems for their kind of destination website out there. When we asked this last time, though, we added a new category that kind of represents this different way of thinking: iterative site improvement. So instead of going through and saying, every 5 years we kind of take a step back, tear it all apart, put it back together, are there organizations doing this on a more iterative, ongoing pathway that starts after that last redesign was done and just continues along the way, so that there isn't this big interruptive project that happens on a rare basis? And we've been talking with organizations about that. We've seen organizations talk about that. We wanted to get a sense if organizations were actually doing it, and about 1 in 7 organizations said yes, that sounds like what we're doing right now. About 15% of respondents, which honestly in a lot of ways was, I think, bigger than we thought it was going to be. But organizations that are trying to make that shift so that they're just continually evolving what they're doing from that perspective. Now, what does this look like in practice, right? The idea of not having to go through and doing this big, let's blow it up and rebuild it project every couple of years sounds really good. But I think a lot of organizations struggle to understand, what does that mean when I actually go to do it? And it often begins with optimization of the experience, going through making gradual changes that you're testing all the time. And if you make a change and it advances the things that you want to do, great, you'll keep that, you'll make it part of the permanent experience. If you're making a change and it doesn't get you moving the direction you want, then you can back that off and test something different instead. Now, the challenge can be that a lot of organizations that are looking at, it's really time to blow this thing up. We have a big project. We already have very full-time jobs, and adding this on top is going to be a lot to try and tackle. Unfortunately, that's a tough time to start with this iterative redesign approach. It's something that really you need to start like when the experience is relatively fresh, and then you are continuing optimizing, and then also as you look at where you may want to go, how you may want to evolve the experience, you're doing that gradually over time. So when you get to that, say, 5-year point, you've already made many changes. It looks different, it feels different, it functions differently than it did 5 years ago. And so that's the thing that gets you out of having to do that big project at that point in time. And you've been getting this added value all along the way, which I think is maybe an underappreciated value of that approach. Now, we're still, 85% of organizations are still doing a more traditional redesign kind of cycle. That's going to still be a big piece of how organizations approach this. But we do expect this iterative redesign approach as a strategy to continue to grow here over the next couple of years.
So where do we begin with this work? So there's a lot going on here. For this theme, thinking about that continuous improvement, starting really with that consumer data, understanding both the data that you have access to, where that lives, how it comes together, and understanding the MarTech landscape at your organization, where all of those pieces are at that touch that consumer experience, how do they fit together? And then starting to work through a process of road mapping that out. And as Ben said, this idea of getting to the full product mindset and continuous iteration on the digital experience is definitely the direction things are headed, but it's not necessarily a thing everybody can do tomorrow all the way across their digital experience. So it may take some larger steps to get to a place where that is possible in the longer term. But that's kind of the process folks are working through. Along the way, they're getting that roadmap in place and really understanding with the data in mind, what is the analytics and measurement strategy that you have in place? How do we value different kinds of interactions across the digital experience so that we know as we're making changes what we are actually delivering in terms of value? And that really helps to set up that testing and optimization strategy. So how are we going to go about making those changes? How are we going to test different things? How do we show that the changes that we've made throughout that experience have contributed to the bottom line and are really producing value? Without some of those foundations, you're kind of shooting in the dark there, not really knowing where what success is going to look like for you. So overall, thinking about the topics we've covered today and where to begin, and really getting some conversations started, we just got a few ideas to leave you with in terms of thinking and having maybe some internal conversations to start to think about the digital experience in a little bit different way in the year ahead. And the first of those is probably easier said than done, but it's really to think about all of those consumer-facing digital experiences and start to understand and shift the conversation around that ownership. And this isn't saying to go, claim all the things and take over all of those experiences. We know health systems are very complex organizations. This is really about a shared ownership model and making sure that there is a voice that represents the consumer when you're talking about those consumer-facing digital experiences. The second piece here is to continue on that path, really developing that relentless focus on the consumer experience, making sure that you've got data available to you, both in terms of how consumers are interacting with your own health system and your own digital experiences, and those types of analytics, and then adding to that, whether that's small slices with each project, making sure that there are user research components built in. We really like to make sure that as we're working on projects and designing digital experiences, we've got touch points baked in to include users, include the consumers in that, whether that's in more of a formative way of gathering information and understanding that patient journey and where things fit ahead of time, or evaluating the outcome. The more we incorporate along the way, again, with that product mindset, we can make those adjustments and react to the learnings faster and avoid, having that big bang reveal that doesn't quite work. That's definitely not the place that we want to be at. So along the way, trying to find those short-term wins. Not everything is going to be a big giant project and a big giant effort. We want to start building, rolling that snowball, combining some short-term wins, but making sure that we've got that long-term vision as well. So making sure that you've got kind of that North Star that you're focused on, and lining up the themes and the projects along the way to help build towards that. And then the last point is to really make sure, again, with that consumer-centric viewpoint, the experience really needs to drive the technology and not the other way around. And again, easier said than done, but keeping that consumer in mind, that we're not just picking technology for technology's sake. We want to make sure that it is supporting the experience that we're trying to create, that our consumers are telling us that they need, and that it's going to drive that value as a result.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for everyone joining us. We do have time for questions. I don't think we've gotten any in just yet, but you can still submit those questions in the Q&A field. David, a question to you, as organizations are starting down this path, what do you see as the biggest stumbling block that organizations often hit when they're beginning to undertake these kinds of transformative initiatives?
Yeah, I think there's, like I was just saying, that figuring out where all the pieces are at is a little bit bigger than you might imagine. And understanding what's out there, where those touch points are at, where they're coming from, and what the moving pieces are inside these complex organizations. So getting a seat at that table is one of the bigger challenges. And then also not making it too big. So having that longer term view, but finding even small wins that start to build the case for being consumer centered in that experience, for making small changes that can improve that experience and building on that success. Sometimes it feels like we need to do a big initiative, big project, when some small tests and some small changes can really start to prove out the value.
Yeah, so really engaging stakeholders, both engaging upwards and getting buy-in from senior leadership, engaging people in operations in the clinical organization, other places, really important. And then, yeah, as you say, big vision, but start with pieces that you can exercise, or you can get some wins on, you can really experiment with. And then sort of build on that towards some of the bigger, harder problems that are going to be a little more challenging to get through.
I think we see groups that are being successful. It's a big networking process of finding your fans. If it's a challenge to get some of these things moving forward, somewhere in the organization, there's somebody who's thinking like you, and finding them, getting that momentum, and using that as a pilot project. Healthcare loves pilot projects, so using that to really build that momentum is important work.
Absolutely. Well, I don't see any other questions at this time, so if you have them later, you can go ahead and we do have something here. I'm sorry. What do you see as most helpful in terms of soliciting user feedback and executing user testing?
That's a great question. As I was kind of saying earlier, there's a lot of different places in the process that you can incorporate that user research. And so I think right off the bat, it's important to know what you're trying to accomplish with it, so that output from that research and that consumer engagement is feeding some sort of decision making and really going to be applied. So understanding whether it's, we need to understand the problem space better, understand the user's perspective there, or we need to actually, we have something to put in front of them and we want to test, does this work? Is this a thing they would use? Where are they tripping up throughout that? So first of all, understanding what you're trying to solve. And then I think the second piece is really thinking about it as an ongoing process. And organizations that I've seen be most successful with that have this just baked in on a routine basis, and it's an ongoing, doesn't have to be a big thing, but it's just baked in so that there are opportunities along the way, whatever is going on, to have that feedback and have that input from the consumers, and do that UX research.
Yeah, I would agree. There are just so many tools and options for how to get some of this feedback out there. At one point, we actually, I think on a couple different occasions, we've put together different ways of trying to represent kind of the world of tools, and kind of what they're good and bad for, where their strengths are. Right? You've got more quantitative tools, you have more qualitative tools, you have tools that are more retrospective, looking at things that actually exist out there, looking at past usage data, things like that, versus things that are more prospective. How does it make sense for you to have these things organized rather than how are they organized today? So yeah, it really feeds down to understanding the problems you're trying to solve, and there's always a couple of tools and options available to tackle each one of those out there.
Yeah, I think that's a great reason to have a good partner on board with that, especially as you're getting started, to direct all of those myriad options for tools and approaches, and how to set up some of that research and make sure that it is going to achieve what you want it to achieve at the other end of it. It can be really valuable.
Yeah, I will say, oftentimes having a good set of consumers and patients that you can actually take this to can be really helpful, though, if you can avoid some of the challenges of recruiting. Um, with that, I think we're going to just remind everyone that there is a companion ebook to today's session as we are looking at reimagining the healthcare digital experience. You can go to genetic.com/reimagine to get a copy of that, or in the post-webinar survey, I think there will be a box where you can request that as well. And thank you for joining us today and spending the last hour with us. It's been a real pleasure to share some of our thoughts with you, and have a wonderful, wonderful year ahead.